Hey, everybody, it's Natalie Bencivenga, and welcome to another edition of Facts Over Fear. We are turning our attention back to data centers, back to AI, and back to what that means as we're impacting our communities with these new spaces. Now, there's been a lot going on in the news cycle, and I know there's so many things to talk about, but this is a really important one because this is about the future of our country, of our waterways, of the environment, of labor. So I really wanted to make sure that we stay on top of this conversation. Today, we are going to be digging into a growing issue in particular that is playing out in small towns around the nation, the rapid expansion of these data centers tied to AI and cloud computing, and what happens when local governments are asked to approve massive projects with limited or little information. This just happened in my own backyard here in Springdale, Pennsylvania. A proposed data center sparked questions about zoning, transparency, energy use, and whether municipal planning laws are keeping up with big tech's infrastructure boom. Public Source reporter and deputy editor Jamie Wiggan is joining me now, and he investigated how this decision unfolded, what it reveals about power, process, and community voices in local government. Jamie, as always, it's so nice to connect with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Natalie.
Absolutely. So it's a big topic. And what I've always appreciated with what you at Public Source are able to do is really dig in and investigate and talk about the humanistic elements. I saw all of the different people that you were interviewing, and I'm curious to hear what they had to say. But if people haven't read the story yet at publicsource.org, can you talk about what was the data center proposal in Springdale and why was it raising a lot of red flags for local officials and residents alike?
Yeah, so the proposal is now a reality in a sense because it got approved. But essentially, it's the project to build a data center within the square mile borough of Springdale. And I think one of the things that made it a little bit sticky, particularly for residents and local officials, was just how close it would be to the residential centers. And some of that is a legacy of many of these kind of older industrial towns that we have here in the outskirts of Pittsburgh. The site that it's being built on was a power station that was shuttered, I think, about 4 years ago. So, that was built probably before modern zoning regulations and the time when it was pretty common to have, mills or power stations right up against homes and houses. But I think a lot of people were pretty relieved when that came down. And then to see something new coming in that place that might bring its own kind of slew of disruptions was a concern for folks.
Yeah, I was really shocked when I read your article that it actually did go through because just the look on people's faces, even in the photos that were shared with the piece, you could tell there was a lot of confusion and frustration. And this wasn't just a yes or no kind of vote. There were some gaps in municipal planning and zoning laws that really this case exposed. Can you talk a little bit about the process of what happened?
Yeah, I mean, so process itself kind of involved like several kind of variances and sort of technical
Hmm.
things to do with zoning law.
Hmm.
But I think that the biggest thing that it highlights and the thing that we ended up kind of digging into for the
Hmm.
story was this question of what powers municipalities have to regulate
Yeah.
development in their communities. And sort of what I learned from talking to some lawyers and experts was that Pennsylvania has its own set of laws and conventions around this, and they tend to be a little bit more restrictive compared to some other states. Notable too is the fact that Allegheny County, where we're focused here, has 130 municipalities, so it's very fragmented. Um, but the important thing is that well, there's two important kind of legal maxims at play. One is that um, every municipality has to like designate somewhere for every possible kind of development that is
Hmm.
considered a sort of a legal type of development. So you can't, first of all, build an ordinance to deliberately exclude something like data centers. You could
Hmm.
restrict them to a particular zone, but when you're a square mile, that's pretty limited, right? So there's that piece, and then the other piece was that you can't really do anything to regulate after the fact. So if a developer comes in and submits a land plan, I think at the point of the application, you can't then start making changes to sort of kind of rein in or restrict that plan. They've kind of won the race, so to speak. So the emphasis of what the advocates and the folks who are working in this space is that the takeaway from this is that municipalities should be trying to get to this early and
Hmm.
thinking about this. There's a lot of activity happening in this industry, and the advice is to kind of get ahead of that and start looking at your ordinances now and see if you try to prepare for them if they do come to your town.
I'm going to ask you something that I'm not even sure if you'll have the answer to, and it's okay if you don't, but you really got me thinking around this idea of what makes a community and this idea that we have these rules in place, Jamie, and sometimes I think there's this concept that, well, that's the way it is, and we can't
Mm,
change it. And that's just how municipalities work. Do you know what it would take for a community to say, this isn't actually how we want a municipality to function, and why should any kind of business be allowed to be in our town,
mm.
especially when it hasn't proven itself to be profitable or environmentally sound? Is there a way that a community could come together and literally, I guess, change an ordinance or change the way it runs? And how hard would that be?
Yeah, so I mean that is essentially what this boils down to. Is I mean
Hmm.
there's always going to be limitations on
Hmm.
what regulations you can put in place, and again, you've got all these layers of government. You
Right.
have the local municipality; it has certain powers, and then utility companies have certain powers, and counties and states. So there are all these different layers, and municipalities have certain things they can do
Hmm.
within limits, and what the advocates who are sort of looking at this, people like Protect Penn T and Penn Environment, who have kind of lawyers who are involved in this conversation and trying to sort of work with municipalities to educate them on these, um, for instance, Penn Environment has created a model template
Hmm.
that municipalities can adopt or adapt or take parts of.
Hmm.
So there are certainly things you can do. Again, it highlights the issue was, residents and even the council itself, in the case of Springdale, only sort of started getting concerned about this issue after
Right.
it was raised, and at that point, it is essentially too late to do anything, and that was why. And I I missed this important point. In the first question, the other important piece of this was that all the folks on council said, well, at least the majority of folks who voted for it verbalized that they didn't want this, but
Wow.
they were afraid of legal repercussions because they didn't have the regulations in place in their ordinance to regulate further.
So when you say legal repercussions, do you mean being sued? And how does that translate? Because could this AI data center sue an individual council person? Would it, or is it suing the council itself? And then what would that lead to? What was the concern there?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so
Sure.
but I think it's more the borough kind of corporately would have the liability. But essentially, again, the principle of law at play is that a developer has the right to do what
Hmm.
they want to do with their land unless your ordinance says you can't do this because it's in
Right.
this zone. And they don't have anything on their ordinance that says you can't build a data center here.
I find all of this so funny because like a lot of these ordinances were probably created long before, a data
Yeah.
center was a thing. So for me, it just seems interesting that they're using these terms and these legal workarounds
Mhm.
for an issue that had never come up before. It would sort of be like talking about electricity before we knew what electricity was and how it would impact an area. That's fascinating.
Right, and that again is a crucial part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
That was presented in this reporting is yes, this is a thing that the developers are ahead of
Mm-hmm.
the lawmakers and the sort of local municipalities on this matter.
It's so
Yeah,
interesting.
and it's there was one of the attorneys I spoke to kind of compared it to certain kinds of fracking technology that
Right.
have been introduced over the last 20 years, and injection wells, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
they weren't done, and suddenly they were. And if you
Right.
don't kind of have um, stipulations that are specific to this technology, then you can't really regulate it. So the developer gets to come in first,
Wow.
and do their thing essentially. So again, it's all
Jamie, that's
about who gets there
shady.
first.
That's real shady. I mean, I think it's shady because it's sort of like, what are you supposed to create these imaginary scenarios and get prepared for them ahead of time? That's just really interesting the way that it was being presented. I want to
Mhm.
talk a little bit more about the data centers themselves,
Mhm.
and how they're often being framed as clean or low impact. Based on your reporting and what you heard from the community and other advocates in the area, what are some of the concerns that Springdale and other communities like it are raising, especially around land use, energy, and noise?
Yeah. Well, I think there are a lot of variables on this,
Mm-hmm.
and it's part of I think the frustration at Springdale is that they haven't committed to an energy source, so that leaves a lot of questions unanswered there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think noise is certainly a common piece of this, and again, maybe that's not as much of an issue in other locations where these are outside of residential areas, but in Springdale, I mean, you have neighborhoods, you know, right
Right.
next to it on
Right.
three sides. And they make kind of a continuous sort of low frequency noise, which I think some people would find pretty
Mm-hmm.
unsettling.
Yeah. Mm.
So that is a piece, definitely. Um, yeah, um, I think maybe the low impact piece could be a little bit of a misnomer because
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
might not have the impacts on site. You might be pulling in 180 megawatts from somewhere else in the grid, but
Hmm.
180 megawatts, which is what this requires, is the equivalent of nearly 200,000 households of power. So that is you know requiring that energy to be created somewhere, and that will obviously be having an impact
Right.
somewhere. Maybe not right on site. But I think they're talking about having diesel generators as a backup, and so that
Oof.
obviously, when they would kick in, that could create some more local disruptions.
Absolutely. If you're just joining me, I'm Natalie Bencivenga. I'm with Jamie from Public Source. We're talking about an incredible article focused on AI data centers and what happened to a community here in Pennsylvania, and how we really need to be getting ahead of this if a community wants to be able to push back against them. I just want to read one of the comments. John Newman says, I'm a supervisor at a nearby Indiana Township, and I'm a lawyer. The developer would sue the borough itself. Okay, so we were talking a little earlier, Jamie and I, about
Hmm.
how this would work and why some of the council people were concerned about voting no, even though they didn't want to necessarily be a part of this. The developer would sue the borough itself. Individual elected representatives are protected from liability if they follow the advice of the township solicitor. That's why the councils cave to advice of solicitors who often work with the developers clients. That's really interesting. Thank you for that thought, John. We appreciate you weighing in. All right, let's move it along here. So, when we're looking at this, Jamie, let's zoom out a little bit.
Hmm.
How common is this becoming? Like you were saying, people need to get in front of this if they want a say in whether or not this is going to be a part of their community. Are small towns across Pennsylvania or, the United States as a whole facing similar pressure from data centers and these AI infrastructure projects? Are you hearing that from any other neighborhoods and communities across the region?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, at a national level, there's a big push as this technology
Hmm.
becomes, more and more commonplace. And there's, I think, incentives to get in there and have that capital so that you can be the one benefiting from that. Regionally and statewide, there's been a push for it. I think the article mentions the I'm not going to get the name right, but the big
That's
summit
okay.
that they had in
Hmm.
CMU back in July, I think it was,
Hmm.
when it was everyone from Trump to Shapiro, McCormick. We're all here, sort
Yep.
of, talking up this industry and its potential benefits for the region. I spoke to Stephanie Pashman from the Allegheny Conference for this story, and she's
Hmm.
pretty bullish on the economics. So part of it is, there's an appetite for it, there's a market for it nationwide.
When you say bullish for the economics, what do you remember specifically? Anything that she shared in terms of economic progress it could bring to the region?
Well, they're doing some modeling on this, and they hadn't finished it by the time we were
Hmm.
talking, and she did say she would kind of reach back out and share that with us down the road. But she did say from the data she's seen, it's good on jobs, direct jobs and indirect jobs. But I didn't get too many more specifics on
Sure.
that. But going back to your prior question,
Hmm.
there's a bit of a boom to try and build this. You have stakeholders and lawmakers in the state
Hmm.
and region sort of supporting it, and then you have, I think, assets that are here that are sort of holdovers from the industrial heritage of this area that kind of make towns like Springdale attractive to
Yeah.
developers. So I think you have that going on, and yeah, I mean, there's a big development over in Oklahoma City, where they're building a
Hmm.
sort of a gas powered data center, well, a gas powered generated to power data center, and maybe other things. And that's going to be, I think, in the billions of megawatts, which will be in excess of, I think, what Duquesne Light currently sort of provides in its total coverage area. So we're talking huge,
Wow.
huge amounts there. That is a little further out of the town there.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I'm less familiar with the details and
Hmm.
what sort of local support it has. There's another one there's talk of one coming to Stowe Township, which is very close to Pittsburgh, just outside the city near McKees Rocks, and that's another very small community where they have an industrial history and kind of that legacy of houses right next to mills and zoning that probably still reflects that. So I don't know what sort of conversations local leaders have had there, if they're thinking about regulating. But that could potentially bring a similar sort of situation.
Wow.
Upper Burrell, I think there's something in the works there. Yeah, there's a lot coming.
It does sound like a lot. And I think that's really the feeling I get from listening to you
Mhm.
after what you've been able to report on and who you've talked to. It's overwhelming. And so when we're talking about this, going back to your earlier talking point around the economy, um, these data centers are often being pitched. I mean, I've had plenty of conversations with people in AI and from the environmental perspectives, but the economy is always sort of the main focal point of the wins. But based off of what you found so far and what your research has shown you at Public Source, who is bearing the cost of it? I want to dig into that a little bit
Mm.
more because you just brought up a couple of really interesting points around generators and huge amounts of energy, and people are really worried about how this is going to impact their electric bills. And just saying what you said about Duquesne Light, like they can't, it sort of eclipses what they're producing. So when we're talking about benefit versus cost, what are you hearing from different stakeholders in the region?
Yeah, I want to say off the bat that was not the sort of area that I sort of honed in on
Sure.
for this story. Obviously, it's very much part of the
Hmm.
conversation. I think there's I think that's one of the big questions.
Yeah.
Obviously, one of the significant things about a project like this is the cost of it. This is
Yeah.
the one in Springdale. The construction cost plus land acquisition are getting close to $1 billion for a project in a square mile
Wow.
borough, that's a big investment,
Yeah.
and and it's so it takes a certain kind of developer with certain kinds of assets to be able to undertake this kind of project. And as it happens, I think it's backed by finances from New York. They're not
Mm,
really local folks.
mm,
I think it's, again, I'm not super familiar with the industry, but I think it's mostly a sort of a passive kind of income stream. You put
mhm,
the investment into the equipment, into the facilities. The when they're presenting this to the borough, they are sort of touting construction jobs, and then I think around 80 full-time jobs is what they're saying. Who they're going to go to, what kind of jobs? I think you know there are questions around that.
sure.
Um, yeah. So, and then the tax piece as well. They
Right.
were obviously really kind of pushing the tax injection that this is going to give to the local school district and the borough, because if this facility gets appraised at what it's worth or what they spent on it, then it would be a big injection
Mhm,
to the school district and the borough. But it's not
mhm,
necessarily going back into the pockets of folks who live there, but maybe that goes to resources in the classroom. Maybe it goes to more folks in the road department or in public safety and things like that.
mm.
So I think there is there's some investment that's happening here, but I think the majority of the revenue is not going to stay local. It's going to be, assuming it's successful financially, I think the money is going to go to the owners who don't live in this state. Is
If
my
we
understanding.
No, I appreciate that. And as we're wrapping up, I thank you so much for spending part of your evening with me tonight talking about this piece. When you're thinking about the future of this work within the scope of public source, are there any other angles that you or your team members and the other journalists at the organization are planning on looking at? Because I always tell people, if you want to hear and read quality journalism, investigative journalism about Southwestern Pennsylvania, go to Public Source. And I will say it again, like I say it all the time, even when I don't have one of your journalists on, it doesn't matter. I use you guys a lot as a source because I trust the reporting that you do on the ground. And I'm curious, what other angles, if any, that you're thinking about pursuing? Because to your point, I think our conversation, if nothing else, raised a heck of a lot more questions around so many different angles of this topic. And if you haven't given to Public Source in a minute, Pittsburgh needs help right now with local journalism. So make sure you are definitely donating to them whenever possible.
Well, thanks for the shout out, Natalie. We
Yeah.
appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think this is very much like an evolving situation. There
Hmm.
is a lot more to explore. We've done a little bit of reporting on the sort of the economics and the job force side of it. Um, the article I did goes a little bit into the energy and supply kind of questions, but there's a lot more to explore there. I think as some of these come online, or if new projects come into play, we'll be looking out for those. I'm excited to say we do have a new economic development reporter who will be joining
Mm.
us in the coming weeks, and I'm sure she'll be digging into these things soon. So yeah, thanks for the support, and thanks for everyone who's tuned in. It's been a pleasure being here.
As always, I appreciate you, Jamie. And Kim Lyons appreciates Public Source too. She says they do such important work. Make sure you support them. I couldn't agree more. Well, we'll definitely be continuing this conversation as it continues to develop. This is a super important topic that I want to make sure that people are hearing about and understanding more fully, in particular, how they can then go back to their own communities, their own councils, and get ahead, like you said, of these situations in case there are things that they would like to change within their municipality that they're able to as it relates to AI data centers. So, Jamie, if people want to read this story or learn more about the work at Public Source, where can they go?
Publicsource.org, and then we're also on socials, on X and Blue Sky and IG and Facebook, if you want to find us there too. No
Awesome.
paywalls.
No.
like Natalie said, if you want to donate, we welcome that, but it is totally optional. So thanks for reading, thanks for your support, and thanks for having me, Natalie.
Absolutely. And as always, everyone, until next time, make sure you take care of yourselves and each other. Good night. Thanks again, Jamie.
Thanks.